Welcome everyone, and I just want to remind you to turn off your audio and leave your video on, please. We'd love to see you, but turn off your audio. And welcome to our second Campfire Talk of the season. Campfire Talks is an ongoing series hosted by the Burning Man Project's Camp Support Team. And we're composed of volunteers from around Burning Man. And what we try and do is bring together theme camp organizers by this virtual campfire to feature your stories, share your knowledge, discuss timely topics, and find new ways to connect. Many of our camp support team are here working tonight. I invite the camp support team to unmute your mics and say hi and wave so people can see who you are.
Hi.
And I am Puppy, aka Brian Baker. I am one of the leads of Camp Religious as Fuck. And I'm one of the producers of this talk with Larry. And Larry's going to be in the background handling some of the tech support with our tech moderators. Tonight, we are going to be talking about how to make the inclusion at Burning Man truly radical. We'll hear how things went with the multicultural POC neighborhood and how camps can support diversity efforts. We'll hear about disability access and inclusion and how one camp handled an issue of significant conflict. After our speaker discussions, we'll have a time of Q&A. And the way that's going to be handled is we'll ask you to write your questions in the chat. And then when we get to the Q&A period, we have a chat moderator who will then be taking the questions and asking our speakers. I want to let you know that captions are available, and there should be a button at the bottom of your screen if you would like to use the captioning. And this is the captioning that comes with Zoom, which means whenever you host a Zoom meeting, you can offer captions as a part of what you're doing. And unlike previous campfire talks, where instead of introducing all of the speakers up front and having more of a free-form discussion, this campfire talk is divided into segments. So for one segment, we're going to focus on race. Another segment will focus on disability, and et cetera. And I will introduce the speakers at the beginning of each of those segments. And then all of the speakers will be participating in the Q&A at the end. To prime our conversation, we created a few poll questions that you're invited to answer, and I invite Monday to start the poll.
Puffy, did you want me to launch all of these polls?
Yes.
We'll do the next one.
Okay, so most of us didn't know there was a multicultural people of color neighborhood. Okay. Have you had an experience or interaction during Burning Man that made you feel uncomfortable or excluded as a result of racial, ethnic, or cultural insensitivity? Okay, so 27% said yes. All right, next question. Was the radical inclusion of disabled people part of the conversation and planning for your camp or art car? Okay. All right. So 24% planned for it. A few planned but didn't implement. And then the others didn't or didn't know. All right, one last question. Are you aware of your camp interacting with disabled people this year? Okay. Looks like 38% interacted with disabled people and were pleased with how they were included, and 63% weren't aware of disabled people coming to your camp. Thank you so much for this. All right, let's get on with our program. And I would like to invite Monday to spotlight Level and Scout, who are going to be our first two speakers. And Level is the placement manager for Burning Man and is in charge of all of this that we're doing. And Scout is a four-time burner. She camped with Camp Mo Better in the Multicultural POC neighborhood this year. And that's a first-time camp that was majority Burgeons and African Americans from the DC area. They had around 25 members, and Scout was one of 4 camp leads that helped with logistics and coordination. I'd like to first invite Level to talk briefly about what happened with the org that led up to the creation of the Multicultural POC neighborhood, and then ask Scout for her insights on how it went and how we can do better. Take it away.
All right,
Level.
thank you. Thanks, Puppy. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second Campfire Talks for the year. I just want to thank you all for joining us tonight. This topic today is near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure to all of you too. So I wanted to give a little background about the work that is being done, has been done, and will continue to be done. So in my hat as the placement manager, I obviously get to assist and support all the theme camps in Black Rock City, but I also wear another hat, which is the R.I.D.E stewardship group. As a part of the Burning Man project, there is a group of people made up of, sort of many department representatives that have come together largely after the George Floyd murder, to say, how does Burning Man show up and have this conversation? Diversity and inclusion is a topic that has been ongoing in the Burning Man community even before 2020. So I do want to acknowledge that this is not only spurred by that, but I think really a lot of the momentum and inertia really came about after that, as much of the world decided to wake up and say, wow, we really need to take a stand here and do something. I'm going to share some slides, if that is okay. Give me a second to cue them up, because this can be a little bit of an issue, but I think I know how to do this. My slide deck is just going to go over a few points to highlight, to let you all know, because I'm a little surprised. Well, not totally surprised, but the poll was really telling Not everyone here was aware of things that happened, so hopefully you'll learn a little bit now. All right, so let me pull up my points. Now I can't see it. I used to know how to do this. Are you all seeing this? Can I see a thumbs up if you can see my screen? No, not seeing it. Okay, stop that. Let me try this another way. Maybe while I'm figuring this out, Scout, do you want to introduce yourself?
For sure. And yeah, we've all been there with the Zoom technical difficulties. But yes, my name is Deara, aka Scout at the Burn. And as Puppy shared, I'm a 4-time burner, and I was a co-lead for the first time with Camp Mo Better. And I'll dive into it during my presentation, but it definitely is an enlightening experience. Being a camp lead, a lot of work goes into just getting like the ball rolling. And then once you're at the burn and that ball is rolling, it's like, well, how do we stop it? Like,
It
but
never
I'll
stops.
pause there.
All right, I think I got it queued up. Give me one more chance to do this right. Share screen. All right, can you all see this now? Awesome. So R.I.D.E in 2022. So like I said, this a lot of the efforts started in 2020. Internally within staff, we really did our best to say, what resources do we have here? Who in our community already is doing this work? We obviously have a lot of amazing burners and burners of color who take on leadership in the world. And so we pulled all that together, and in 2021 came up with a R.I.D.E anti-racism pledge. I do encourage you all to go onto the Burning Man website and read that if you have not yet. It outlines a plan for the foreseeable future. Some of it is like low-hanging fruit that we can all do together. Some of it is more complex and requires a lot more time. And so while we do want to see results on an annual basis, we also are kind to ourselves in saying that this is a journey that we're all on and trying to figure out together. So please do read the anti-racism pledge. If you just go on the Burning Man website and type in those words, you will find it, or whatever your search engine is. Another large effort that we attempted this year was dedicating tickets through a ticketing program to increase diversity on playa. So you, as a camp, may have received some additional tickets. Actually, we were able to kind of cover a couple hundred camps that really demonstrated dedication and commitment and actual work to working on R.I.D.E in their camps. And so we tried to honor that by supporting some additional access to Black Rock City. We also had a few other streams that went directly into getting, burners of color, but also other underrepresented groups into Black Rock City. I've heard anecdotally, people feel like 2022 was the most diverse BRC they have seen. I don't know if that's how this audience feels, but we're still looking at the numbers, still looking at the census, and we'll be able to report that fairly soon. My third point here is that we had more artists of color and women and non-binary artists than we have in ever. And I think that part of the call out to the world is that, we want to make this experience and make this community as open and welcoming as possible. And I think there were a lot of individuals that heeded that call and said, hey, I want to bring art. I've never gone to Burning Man, heard about it, so have some friends that go. And also same with theme camps. Scouts camp herself, her camp lead, had never been to Burning Man ever and decided to start a new camp on top of it all, which was just mind-blowing and amazing. And so, people really heeded that call, saw that commitment, and said, we want to show up and build art. Some signature projects you may have heard of include the Solar Shrine project. That was one that was going to burn that didn't actually get to burn during Burn Week. There was also the Black Burner Project, Aaron Douglas's project, Black Ashe. It was a large scaffolding structure with a couple really, enormous photos of Black burners. And there are others. I'm not going to list them all because I have a limited amount of time. There was a poll about the multicultural people of color neighborhood that encompassed over a dozen camps that were led by folks of color, and the populations of those camps were primarily people of color. It was centered around 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock between C and D. I know not everyone gets around to every block in Black Rock City, but I think it's an effort. I do want to be clear, a community-run effort. This wasn't something that Burning Man as an organization said this needs to happen. Really, the community, these camps came together to pull that off, and I think Scott will tell us a little bit more about that. And I also want to acknowledge that Burning Man as an organization held a couple talks, but theme camps were as well. If you go to the Playa events guide, it's still online actually, if you want to go and search there and just type in the word diversity, type in the word inclusion, type in the word race, things like that. You'll see that there were just an incredible amount of people that were initiating their own programming and contact to talk about these issues. So as with all things Burning Man, we can't do it. Everything's a community-wide effort. So it's not just something coming from the org. And finally, we are building our R.I.D.E volunteer team. There have been a handful of individuals who stepped up and are trying to build a foundation for this work to happen more seamlessly. Like I said, when we first started in 2020, we sort of scrounged together what was available. And even though we had some amazing people, it was still felt a lot like duct taping an effort together. And now that, we were a few years into it, we also are trying to build a volunteer base to really support the foundation of all these efforts. It's wide and it's vast. And finally, I do want to recognize individual departments have stepped up themselves to try to figure this out too. Rangers have their own sort of council that's addressing R.I.D.E work, and they had more sensitivity. There's our kind of foot soldiers in Black Rock City and foot soldier support. And there were incidents that they're trying to figure out, like, how do we get a better handle on it? How do we help the community ease tension around these issues? Another thing I want to point you all to is Burning Man Hive. It is, if you haven't been there, the URL is hive.burningman.org. There are trainings on there. There's a group on there. There's even some events that are hosted on there. There was an event recently called Exploring the Black Femme Artist Experience in Black Rock City with 3 lovely Black femme artists. And, it was sort of panel style, much like our Campfire Talks. Go check it out. It's all there. There's also trainings. We're still going to be building on these, but right now you can, and your campmates can go and learn if you haven't. Some of this stuff is, stuff you could probably find at your, average corporate like diversity training space. But we also did our best to make it relevant to burner culture. So you'll see burner fragility really focuses on what does it mean to be a burner and how do we arrive in this kind of conversation. Representation at Burning Man is really focused on the Burning Man community. So Hive's a great resource, and please do check it out there. And what's coming up? We're going to be doing more trainings for the community and staff, both through Hive and through other methods. We realize that telling you to go onto a website and clicking through a bunch of slides may not be the best way to learn. So how can we make that interactive? How can we make that something that we can engage in? We also want to continue improving access to Black Rock City for underrepresented groups. We recognize that more can be done here. You might have thought that 2022 was the most diverse year. Well, we can do better. And so how do we do that? Those are things we are sorting out at this point in time. And then we also recognize that we need to expand the conversation beyond race, and not to not have the conversation about race. But I know even tonight we're saying, there's other aspects to diversity and inclusion. We want to make sure that we do not forget that. And we're building our volunteer team. So my last slide here is just to plug this email address. If you have questions, if you want to volunteer, we have an email address right now where you can send us questions and say, or raise your hand to say that you want to get involved. That's diversity@burningman.org. And I will tell you, we are doing our best, and we don't have all the answers. But if you raise your hand and want to help us figure out the answers and help us work with the larger community around it, we're looking for you. So that's my spiel for now. Thank you for letting me share. And Puppy, I don't know if you have questions that you want to ask or how you want to run this.
No, I just want to turn it over to Scout.
All right, excellent. And fantastic run through of the RIDE work level, because I think there is this aspect of folks knowing there's work going on in the background, but not exactly sure what that looks like, what that has culminated into. All right, so I'm going to jump right into my slide deck. Okay, great. Hopefully everybody can see. Looks good. All right, so my research, or the work that I did over the summer was based off of research that I gathered through interviews, surveys that I shared before, during, and after Burning Man. So this is a lot of the anecdotal and observational research that I gathered, specifically with regards to the neighborhood. So real brief background on this project. I'm a journalism researcher. As Puppy shared earlier, I'm also a 4-time burner. And this year I was a research associate with the Townite Center's initiative in Internet Studies, where my work was focused on how do we redesign, bring in people who are often on the margins of creative design and social design and into a space where they get to decide what it means to have an equitable environment, what power dynamics exist in a space like that, and actually be able to participate. And being a 4-time burner, I thought back to this kind of liberating free space and what that could mean as a framework for bringing that into other areas, whether it be in professional spaces, social spaces, and where my work focuses specifically information ecosystem spaces, mainly the internet. And this picture on the right, because I do a lot all the time, I also brought my family to Burning Man in 2022. So they were also part of Camp Mo Better. My brother is a 2nd-time burner, and then my mother and my sister were 1st-time burners. That is another story though. All right, so real quick, I want to play 2 clips from these videos that will help lay the foundation for what we mean when we say racial inclusion.
We're often encouraged to think about racism as either using certain words or killing someone, and that's the only way that you understand it. And it's really more about power. And one of the ways that it's about power is that it convinces Black people that our lives are only valued in what we can produce and how hard we can work. And this is very touching for me because my father actually died while he was working, and he'd always had 2 or 3 jobs, even though he was a teacher and assistant principal. He never got to rest. He just worked until he dropped dead. And so I don't want to have a life like that. I would like to have a life that engages pleasure and fun and experience and gets to go to different places and goof off and, party and do all these things. And Burning Man really allows for that. Undoing racism, this is not a silly thing. This is not just a side issue to say I want to be able to do something about self-discovery and pleasure. It's a really important thing to be able to say that I can be a fuller, more aware human being.
Here you can radically express.
Sorry, what? Here you can what?
Radically express.
Got it.
I surveyed 40 African Americans, and their number one reason for wanting to return to Burning Man was because they felt human here. And they didn't feel that their race or who they were, their skin color, affected how people saw them and treated them. Their careers outside didn't mean anything. It was just who they were as a person. And for a lot of people, that was the first time as African Americans, whites had ever looked at them as just, you're one of us. And that's a rare thing that people can't even quantify. Many people can.
All right, let's skip out of this and we'll play the very next one.
Imagine, for the first time, you see yourself. After so long of feeling small, left out, or misunderstood, there you are as your full, authentic, bold, beautiful self. No mask, you are joy. In that moment, you understand the importance of showing up as the you really are, versus what others have wanted you to be. And also in that moment, you feel seen, celebrated, safe, and appreciated.
Hi, my name is Erin Douglas. I'm a 3-year burner and the creator of Black Burner Project,
where I've been documenting people of color who go to Burning Man through photography and personal interviews since 2018. If you are a burner, you know the transformative and healing experiences so many of us have had because of Burning Man. We seek to overcome barriers of existing and future BIPOC burners to fully receive the gift a Burning Man experience can offer. Through this project, I've had the mission of driving diversity to Burning Man by creating awareness and creating a space where burners of color can be seen as part of this amazing community. See, I found my way to Burning Man via a gifted ticket. And although I'd seen the world as a solo traveler, often being the only Black woman throughout my trips, the idea of Burning Man and what it would be like as a Black woman out there in the middle of the desert, surrounded by people who didn't look like me or understand my experiences, was much more overwhelming. And I also realized that there were others with similar apprehensions and uncertainties, which led to a feeling of being unwelcomed and thus not attending Burning Man at all. And this is where the idea for Black Burner Project started to develop.
Okay. All right. Escape. Do not play again. And that happens. Okay. So just again, wanted to give that foundation for what we mean when we say racial inclusion in a radically inclusive space. And to also give proper props to those who started this work before the neighborhood came about. And that includes KVIVA and their project Radical Inclusion, where they established a camp-driven program, again, from within the community, which was founded by their late camp leader, Laura Diamond, who was dedicated to seeing more socioeconomic diversity at Burning Man. Okay, that's a little better. Okay. So, and then again, with Erin Douglas and the Black Burner Project, her work did result, as Level shared earlier, in the Block Ashe Project, where we gathered for our Black Burner family reunion photo out on Playa. And it just shows that by her going to the burn those couple of times, getting that one gifted ticket allowed her to come back on her third burn and have this expressive, dynamic, and critical art in a predominantly white environment. And throughout this presentation, you will see quotes throughout, as well as some data that I gathered from the research in the surveys that I deployed before, during, and after the burn. So this was a 3-time burner who shared that I am a second generation Chinese Canadian. I have the ability to code switch, but I wanted to seek out spaces where I didn't have to. I do anti-racism and anti-oppression work in the default world, and I want to be connected to a part of the burn that is also intentionally exemplifying those principles, which is a critical aspect for a lot of folks who do in the default world, do that equity work, that are in these spaces who are trying to push change, which is, represents a lot of the folks of color who attend Burning Man. They do operate in that more progressive mindset, and being able to find a safe space is critical. So why have that safe space, right? From a 2-time burner who I interviewed or surveyed before the burn, they shared that I wanted a safe space to process whatever might come up without having to translate this across race, ethnicity, cultural, and so forth. And there's several things that can pop up as a burner of color in a predominantly white environment, where you may want to find a safe space to be able to express yourself. One of those, I won't go through everything on the list, but I will highlight a few. There is definitely an environment of exclusion when you come as an individual who represents a community that's not fully represented in this space, that there is an othering aspect that exists that makes it a challenge to really be your full self. There's also generational trauma that you'll find Black and brown burners will carry that will come up as a result of, say, commodification of your culture. There are, unfortunately, examples of microaggressions that do occur in this space. One example that was shared with me as an interviewee who attended this burn shared that while they were out, they encountered a woman who was singing a song on a microphone. It was in a public setting at the burn, who elected to sing out the N-word in the song that featured said word. And she was a white presenting individual. And in that instance, it's an immediate snapback for someone in that position where that is a harmful word in a space that's supposed to be radically inclusive. But when it butts heads with that radical self-expression, we have these instances of intentional or otherwise unintentional harm. And then in this one instance, as someone after the burn who answered this question of why do we need a safe space, they shared that there are openly racist cams at the burn. They legitimately I saw a flyer online for a camp hosting a slave auction. It makes sense to give people a safe space to gather and share those experiences. For what it is worth, there are tons of events that are only open to certain groups at certain times, and people don't complain. And this particular person self-identified themselves as white. And if you're curious, this is what that flyer was, or at least this is what I uncovered in my research. I can't say for sure that this is what this individual encountered. And for me as a Black individual, anything that says slave auction is not a welcoming space for me. And while this particular camp has addressed this issue, this was the name of their activity up until 2018, which, as we know, there weren't any official burns in the last 2 years. So it wasn't that long ago in Burning Man time. All right, so what the work that went into building the multicultural community level did touch on. There were private Facebook groups where K Viva and their Project Radical Inclusion created a group that has close to 500 members now of individuals and allies that are supporting the community as they grow, try to find resources, very similar to the Discord server that was created as well. It is a resource exchange as well as a knowledge exchange. Since, as we alluded to earlier with one of our polls, the question was how many people knew there was a neighborhood beforehand, and I believe it was 38 to 62%. That 62% didn't know about the neighborhood. This is where that work would come into play in the following year to ensure that that isn't the case. The Burners of Color resource group that exists on Hive, that is an environment where you don't necessarily have to be in the neighborhood to participate in that group and again, exchange that insight and information. We had consecutive Zoom meetups to again, build relationships, get that understanding. It was a really great way for folks who got tickets through any number of ways that people get tickets outside the main sale and were able to then find camps that aligned with their cultural identity. And as a result of some of this work, there was crowdsourcing around the Black Rock City Diversity Art Guide, not unlike the Rockstar Librarian Guide that exists already within the Burning Man environment. And then fun fact, this is our Solidarity Fist at Camp Mo Better. This was designed and built by my mother, first-time burner, full-time artist, and she built this out of, I mean, God help her, I couldn't do this, but she did it and it was fantastic. But there was apprehension when this design came up to represent, a symbol of the neighborhood. Is that going to be seen as exclusive or put some people off who don't necessarily identify with what the solidarity or the Black Power Fist stands for? But we'll run through the numbers real quick. There were 18 confirmed camps within the multicultural neighborhood. And of those camps, 13 had a population that was 50% or more BIPOC, and that's self-identified. And plus or minus 350 burners who elected to camp within the neighborhood, which, I mean, considering the census data that we'll get later, we know there's 75, 80,000 burners in Black Rock City. 350 just in the neighborhood is almost a negligible number. So just something to keep in mind. So what are the challenges of a racially inclusive space? again, the solidarity fest. This was right outside Camp Mo Better. And while for those who were camping in this space, it was that reminder that while we may come from different backgrounds, cultures, ethnic identities, we can identify together as this community. Was that going to be viewed the same by those outside said community? There were concerns about self-segregation and isolation. That example being, if we are taking ourselves out of the city to create a safe space, are we also removing ourselves from the ethos and the power and the magic of Burning Man itself? So again, concerns and challenges of building a racially inclusive space. There's also the perception of exclusion. Are we, by creating an inclusive space, actually keeping people out? I just want to underline that that was not the intention or the expectation within the community, but the concern was the perception, which that's not something that the community can control. We can only share our message, keep the doors open, and have a safe space for those who do go out into the main city and have that microaggressive moment or experience an unexpected occurrence of generational trauma or their culture being commodified in front of them. We wanted to make sure that we could have that safe space and hopefully not create that perception of exclusion. And then unfortunately, as is always the concern when there is a racialized context to solutions or community-based solutions that focus on race or culture identity, there were concerns about being a target for discrimination and harassment. In my research leading up to the burn, I was just going through some private and public Burning Man Facebook groups. And again, I'll read this one aloud. One individual posted in one of the ticket begging Burning Man groups that I heard Burning Man organization is building an underground railroad subway just for people of color to ride straight into center camp. With an individual who replied saying, but if they make this railroad, then everyone would need a token. Again, it's the racial undertones, the concern that I would have as a first-time burner, curious about what Burning Man is. I'm not really seeing a lot of Black and brown people in the YouTube videos and TikTok. Am I going to be welcomed in a space like this if this is the conversation that's happening? So just things that we had to take into consideration as a community. So a few more data points. So again, this is the question that we had asked earlier. Did you know there was a MPOC neighborhood before arriving on Playa? It's actually 71% of the 81 people, or 81% of people replied saying, yes, they had heard of it. And within that 81%, 71% identified as a person of color. So a good chunk of the individuals who heard about it did identify, but from observational data that I collected and from people that I connected with from the neighborhood, when they saw Black and brown individuals on Playa, they did not know there was a neighborhood. Oftentimes it was the, oh my God, we're out here. And then us replying with, did you know we're also over here in an actual spot? And again, that created the opportunity to bring in people who may not have been aware that there was a safe and inclusive space for them. Second question was, I have brought or attempted to bring attention or awareness to other burners about the racial, ethnic, or cultural insensitivity challenges of Burning Man prior to the neighborhood's formation. So this is, again, one of the questions featured in my survey that will be shared at the end. So if you would like to participate, it is open to all burners. That of the 63% who said yes, that they had attempted to bring attention or awareness to other burners, 65% of those individuals identified as a person of color. So just showing that the burden is still on people of color to bring attention to these issues. And then last data point is I have had an experience or interaction during Burning Man that made me feel uncomfortable or excluded as a result of racial, ethnic, or cultural insensitivity. And 1/3 of respondents said that, yeah, they did have an experience. And what I thought was curious in the data that I collected, that of those 9 individuals who said that they had an uncomfortable experience, 3 of them, a third, identified as white. So I'm curious, just as a researcher, and then as a Black individual, is it because of the inclusive space that was created that let them to feel excluded? And furthermore, isn't that part of the work that you do have to get a little uncomfortable to understand what it means to be racially inclusive as someone who may not ever had to have taken that into consideration, that othering is a thing that other folks experience. Okay, so what can camp leads do to ensure that racial inclusivity? Avoid those performative gestures, such as recruiting diverse campmates without first committing to the education. How do you commit to the education? Level shared earlier that R.I.D.E has trainings on the Hive network. There are ways that you can facilitate racial inclusion discussions before, during, and after. You want to assess how did we do, right? Just to make sure that that worked. You want to leverage the knowledge of those who are already here doing this work, the friends of R.I.D.E. Make sure that you're not, reinventing the wheel, but also making sure that wheel isn't square. You want to make sure that you have a plan to address microaggressions and those cultural insensitivities that occur during the burn. And then pledging to support or assist pro-Black or anti-racist issues or organizations. If your camp may not necessarily be in a position to lean in one of these directions, there are things you can do outside the burn. This is a quote from somebody that I interviewed in person. She's an Indigenous burner as well as a camp lead. One year, there was this unfortunate event in the book, a daytime fight between cowboys and Indians, and it required a dressing up. And I was so horrified by this. 3 members of my camp went and made protest signs and went over. I didn't want to go, but they went to the camp to explain to them what was so wrong about hosting an event like this. That's allyship. And we won't change our culture unless we represent in the spaces that are uncomfortable, right? So it's part of the work, that it's not the burden of people of color to carry these issues and challenges, because at the end of the day, we're pushing back against power and race inequities, and just the nature of doing the work puts us in vulnerable positions. And then what can the org do? So this is what was elevated from the surveys and the interviews. It's expanding and diversifying leadership. And being that I've come from a media background, research background, a lot of times people of color are elevated to positions only to not have the power to make decisions and to make changes. So ensuring that expansion and diversification does include empowerment, creating pathways that Level had discussed about, equitable or gifted tickets. One recommendation was a payment plan. How about pathways for individuals who may be veterans or returning citizens from formerly incarcerated positions, and giving them that opportunity to experience this as well. Making the R.I.D.E initiative more transparent about its roles in decision-making spaces. There were some folks that signed up to volunteer. They weren't sure what it meant. They didn't know if it would have an effect. I know it's in progress, so this is something we can look forward to. Showcasing the importance of the neighborhood's presence before and during the burn. And during specifically, a couple of people have recommended having a designation on the street sign, just to say that, hey, this is the neighborhood, harkening back to the visibility aspect of what it means to be present. And then facilitating relationships between the neighborhood leads and established camps. One unfortunate downside of creating this neighborhood is that, if I'm not incorrect, of the 21, let me see. Okay, of the 18 camps that were in the neighborhood, 13 of them were new. So there was a loss of that institutional knowledge. What does it mean to bring an art car? Where do you got to put the gas? How deep can we go into the playa? Like, those questions were unfortunately thrusted on some of the veterans in the community, and that was a burden for them to carry as well. It's not that they didn't want to, but that is a lot more pressure, and it does complicate the ability of this neighborhood to solidify itself. So some recommendations: establishing new practices and approaches. Okay, this is a fun zoom in from that Gigapan from Jack Rabbit Speaks of where the neighborhood was. So there are a couple of articles from the nonprofit quarterly, Building Resilient Organizations, and then Defining Pro-Black. We have 2 books, The Conversation, and then The Sum of Us. The Conversation is definitely one for individuals. It really is boiling it down to what can you do as a person, and then how do you expand that? And then The Sum of Us is a historical track of how racism has set all of us back, and towards the end, how we can move forward. For those camp leads who want to just jump right in and learn more about this work, racialequitytools.org. It's a very busy website, but they have a lot of great resources, prompts that you can put to use right away. And then for those who find themselves in camps that may not be as open to being racially inclusive, Be Your Better Ally at Harvard Business Review is a great step in you just leveraging your power in your space. Okay, and so lastly, it takes both the large movements and shifts and the small incremental pushing of the systems in order to create change. We won't see ourselves here if we're not creating pathways for us to get here and then break the institutions that are designed to exclude us. This is about that power inequity, the wealth disparity, and the racial challenges that we face as a society, and that it is a whole of society effort in order for us to get here. And I think that if Burning Man can pull it off, figure it out, and establish that framework, we have a real pathway to redesigning our connected world. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Scout. Thank you so much. Thank you, Scout and Level. And when I was designing this campfire talk, I wanted to broaden the conversation from race and include disability and disability access, disability inclusion. One of the first calls I made was to Drama Queen at Mobility Camp. And in talking with her about mobility access, she told me about an area of conflict that happened in their camp and how their camp dealt with it. And while it's not directly about disability access, it is about how we handle conflict around inclusion. And is Birdie here? Do we have Birdie?
She's here. She was able to sign on.
All right. And so I'd asked them, because as a camp lead, when conflict comes up, because I'm conflict averse, my tendency is to, sort of make everything calm and fine and try and move on. But what Mobility Camp did was a great example of how to lean into conflict and learn from it. So I wanted to invite them, before they talk about some mobility access stuff, to just to tell the story of what happened and how they responded. So I'll turn it over to Drama Queen and Birdie.
Thank you, Puppy. And that was a wonderful presentation that we're following. Oh my goodness, that was so informative. Thank you for that very, very good work and inspiring work. Well, I'm Drama Queen, and I'm a 3-time burner. And my second year, I was in charge of transportation. We have a shiny tour. We take people out on our trailer into the playa. And my third year, which was this year, our camp lead, Rat Lady, said, the org has asked us, every camp, to have a ride lead. I said, sure, I'll do it. And I really had no idea what to do. I did take a number of those wonderful trainings on the Hive, but I was completely lost as to how to apply it to camp and what to do. And I kept asking, and I found absolutely no guidance from the org. But something happened at camp that told us exactly what to do. And I will introduce and let Birdie speak for herself. We'll go back and forth a little bit.
Hi, everybody. My name is Birdie. I use she, they pronouns, and it is great to be here tonight with y'all. This was my first year at Burning Man, and when I am not at Burning Man, I am actually in grad school. I attend the University of Nevada, Reno. I'm pursuing my master's, where I work explicitly around rhetorics of oppression and pedagogy of anti-racism, accessibility, and homophobia. So this is work that I do in the classroom and in academia, and also work that, I like to apply out to my life in general. Drama Queen, would you like to take off from here?
Yes, we had a meeting after something happened with Birdie, which she can explain a little bit better. It had never happened before, and none of us knew how to deal with it. And we decided to talk about it. So we had a meeting in our kitchen, and Birdie offered to lead the meeting, but she was unable to. So R.I.D.E led the meeting. What happened? The other thing that happened that was very interesting, that started all of this, is that R.I.D.E followed the org's guidance and asking everybody to choose their pronouns, which I'd never done before. I know about it, other people do it, but I'd never done it. And now I understand the importance. I didn't at the time. And there were people at camp who found that difficult. And I understand where they're coming from grammatically, but it's not that difficult. And grammatically, they is singular, and we could go into that another time. It can be singular very easily. And it gives such respect to everybody who needs that. And so R.I.D.E led the meeting, and we talked about pronouns, and we talked about racism, and we talked about a number of things. And there were some reactions, however, and I would like, Birdie, if you would explain what happened with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, this is my first year out on the playa this year, and I came out early for work week. So I got to, see Mobility Camp be built up around us. I was camping with Mobility Camp. I don't think I said that yet. And when R.I.D.E, so I am queer. I use she, they pronouns. I use multiple types of pronouns. And so, that was one of my biggest fears, is coming out to Burning Man. I don't always know how people hold space for me and if people will respect who I am and my identity. So when, I arrived at camp, and R.I.D.E, like within, I think, 10 minutes of arriving, she had given me, pronoun pins that, were inclusive of the pronouns that I choose to use. Huge weight off my shoulders. I was so relieved. I was so thrilled to be, part of a camp that was thinking about this, and, doing these sorts of actions. But as Drama Queen has hinted at, actually not everybody in camp was respectful of that. Throughout my time at Burning Man this year, I, was the butt of everything from, microaggressive jokes. I was witness to, blatant transphobia, blatant homophobia, just everything along that full spectrum from people within our camp. So, I went and I talked to R.I.D.E and Drama Queen to be like, hey, like, this is what's happening. Like, I am uncomfortable. I don't feel safe. And, we dealt with it. We leaned into it. Oof. And, as Drama Queen said, there was a workshop that happened at camp. I unfortunately was unable to run it, even though I had offered to run it. There was just some miscommunication there. But as I said, this is something that I do professionally in my academic life, and have been doing for many, many, many years before I even pivoted into graduate school. I've done a lot of advocacy and grassroots sort of campaigning to work explicitly on education and diversity. So I was really impressed with the way that Drama Queen and R.I.D.E listened to me, and not only heard my experience and took it very seriously, but then used that to start leverage and leaning into these conversations. So after, we had that workshop on Playa, the three of us talked and decided to launch a whole workshop series off Playa, where we meet on Zoom. For a while, we were meeting about every month and a half. We've taken a little break for the holidays. But we have covered a vast variety of topics that I have been teaching, from my expertise, from my experience leading these workshops in both academic and non-academic settings. So far we've talked about introduction to diversity, where we've discussed race, gender and sexuality, neurodiversity, and allyship. We pivoted to look closely at allyship. Our next workshop will be on neurodiversity, and we have future workshop plans that will cover Native American awareness, where somebody named Cherub has offered to come in and teach that one for us. We'll continue to work on topics of race, gender and sexuality, deaf awareness, as well as strategies and action. We're only doing one workshop at a time right now, because that is, what is most feasible for us. And we're also making sure to go back to our camp and ask folks for for specific feedback from the group. We discussed and we thought it was very important that, these are not just topics that we want the three of us to be deciding to cover. We want this to be, something that is coming from the group that everybody is interested and learning in. And we've had an incredibly positive response so far. So positive, in fact, that we've started to open it up to other community members who are interested in this and want to continue to learn and engage with us. The big thing that I want to emphasize here is, as I'm running these groups, these are never a question of, if, or, it's never a debate of whether or not these things happen. We come into these spaces together to talk about identity, period. Right? We are not questioning whether or not, queerness is okay, right? Queerness that is who we are. That is the spectrum of human experience. But, we all recognize that there are things to be learned. There is verbiage. There is different, expressions that have learned. Things that, were once offensive are now no longer offensive, or vice versa. So we're all able to come together to this collaborative learning space to really figure out our way through, to talk about it, to learn together, and have even found some really fun ways of applying it out beyond our camp so far.
Right. The final workshop that we'll have in a number of months will be on strategies after we've gone through neurodiversity and Native American awareness, and we need to do race. We haven't done that yet. Although it was included, the first workshop included everything. It was an hour of so much input and information, and R.I.D.E is a fabulous facilitator. Absolutely. So specific and so easy to understand. And she does do the PowerPoint, so you've got that to copy. We're going to do deaf awareness, but the most important one will be strategies. For example, I never spoke to the person or persons who spoke badly. Uh-oh, something has happened and I'm no longer emceeing. Oh, something just popped up. I don't know. My email just popped up in front of me. I have no idea why that happened. Welcome to the digital world. I never spoke up to the people who said these things, these offensive things that caused R.I.D.E to leave our camp and not feel safe, because I didn't know what to say. Look, I'm a mother. I'm in my 70s. You'd think I'd know how to do this. I didn't. But because of R.I.D.E, she's given me some strategies, some things to say. Well, not if it happens, but when it happens. It will. And if it doesn't happen at camp, it's going to happen in life. I have no trouble speaking up in certain areas, but it just felt so, I wasn't there. I didn't hear these things. I felt attacked. I felt upset. It just pushes a button when these things happen, when things are said that aren't funny, And I think that the strategies that we will work on will break up into groups, and we'll come up with not just ways that R.I.D.E has researched and uses, but we'll come up with very creative ways to deal with things that happen in everyday life and at camp. We've already had results. One of our members is part of another Burning Man off Playa group, and she had a very racist situation happen in her group. And through these discussions, she has been able to deal with it. And she has now become a R.I.D.E volunteer. So these are the kinds of outcomes that we're looking for. Not everything in camp is going to be pleasant and wonderful. 99% is, but we want that other percent, want everyone to feel safe and comfortable. So I'm going to move into the last part of the discussion, which is about mobility issues. Our camp is all about mobility. It's mobility camp. I don't have a mobility issue. R.I.D.E doesn't have a mobility issue, but our camp leader does, and so do some of our other members. Some are in wheelchairs, some are on crutches, and sometimes this is very, very important. If somebody says they have a mobility issue, believe them, because people have things going on in the way their brains are wired. They maybe have had an illness. Maybe they're getting over a concussion, or it was a concussion something happened, and they know they have a mobility issue, and they have a right to use that ramp that gets up onto our trailer. We have a ramp that goes under our trailer and a tractor that takes us out to the playa. And there have been a number of people on that. Mobility disabled people get first dibs on rides to the playa, but just because someone looks like they don't have a mobility issue, they might. And that you don't even have to ask, they will tell you. So that's the first thing to remember. And the next thing to remember is, I'm going to scoot down here, how can your camp be more inclusive for disability? Well, one of our members is on crutches, Katie, the book fairy. She runs front desk. If you've been to mobility camp, if you've taken one of our shiny tours, or if you've come on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday and taken an artery tour, Katie's there. She's the one with the long hair, looks like an old hippie. That's because she is. Anyway, she always says, if you want your camp to be more mobility inclusive, imagine that one of your camp members is in a wheelchair. And can that person in the wheelchair go everywhere in your camp? For example, let's say you have a barricade in front of your kitchen to keep the sand out. Can that wheelchair make it around the barricade into the kitchen? Something to think about. Or not just get in, is there space for that wheelchair to turn around? That takes a lot of space. That's another thing. Our camp has an obstacle course, and you can get into a wheelchair and try to go up and over bumps in a wheelchair, turn around and go back over the bumps. I couldn't do it. The arm strength is beyond belief. And then there's also a stairway you can climb on crutches. You put one of your legs up and you hop up with your crutches to go upstairs, downstairs, up some other stairs, open a door, close it, go down the stairs, go up and down the other stairs. I had difficulty. So these are things that people with disabilities make it look easy because they've been practicing and they just might be tired. So, be kind. Anyway, do you have a porta potty at your camp? Is it wheelchair accessible? If you have an art car at your camp, can a wheelchair person get into it and travel safe without falling off? If they can get into it? For example, if there's a hammock in your camp, is it accessible for a disabled person? Can the wheelchair person get in and out? Think about that. Imagine yourself in a wheelchair. Imagine yourself in a wheelchair and what you could or couldn't do. And if there's something in your camp you couldn't do, correct it. And then there's another thing that Katie mentioned. I love this. She went to a camp. She's on crutches, so she can get a lot of other places that wheelchairs can't. But she went to a camp with someone in a wheelchair, and she was on her crutches, and they got there. And because the camp had invited them and said, we have a maze, come and see our maze. Well, the wheelchair person couldn't experience the maze because it was too narrow, and the wheelchair couldn't make it through, couldn't turn around. It has to be able to turn 180 degrees. There was a big win, and I don't know if it was this year or 2019, but there was an art car called Fluffy. And Fluffy people got a hold of Danny, Rat Lady, and they said, how can we make, here's our design, how can we make it wheelchair accessible? And it wasn't. They thought it wasn't. But with the recommendations that were given to them, it was made wheelchair accessible. I have a cousin who helped build the Sphere. If you all went to the Sphere this year, it was wonderful. I didn't go up inside of it because I ran out of time. Disabled people could not go up into the Sphere. Could they have made it accessible down at the bottom so that in some way? I can't answer that, but I'm just saying, if you really put your thinking cap on, there are you cannot imagine how many disabled people there are at Burning Man. You see them spinning around in their wheelchairs or someone helping them, and they should be able to go into any camp, So put your thinking caps on, and if you have questions, all you have to do is get a hold of Rat Lady. She'll have some ideas. If you want to take any of our workshops, I'm going to put my email in the chat. You are welcome to attend. All I ask are two things. We have had 2 previous workshops, and it would be useful if you want to take our next workshop on neurodiversity. You really need to have, we have recorded the workshops. You can see them on Vimeo. I can send you the link. And I also have the PowerPoint PDF. If at the very least you read that PDF, that would help. But the PowerPoint, it only takes like 45 minutes to an hour. So if you're interested, I will put that in the chat and you can get a hold of me. I'm Drama Queen and I look forward to hearing from you. And thank you. Thank you very much.
Before we pop off, I want to add just a couple more things, Drama Queen, if that's okay. Another big thing to think about is, big art pieces and how accessible those are. From my understanding, this was the first time in many, many, many years that the man and the man base itself was actually wheelchair accessible. And on the flip, it was the first time again in many years that the temple was not accessible, right? These are two, monumental things that represent Burning Man. And to have a huge part of our population who cannot access these, what does that say? I think, it's also really important to think about what we can be doing at a bigger level. Like, for example, if placement asked camps if their interactivity is wheelchair accessible, when, you're applying in, just asking that simple question, getting those gears flowing is huge, right? And can help start to get these wheels moving and to start getting to people thinking about how accessible or inaccessible is my camp and what can we all be doing to make sure that everything that we have on Playa is accessible as possible.
That's great. And I will be in touch with that's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Thank you so much, both. This is exactly what I was hoping. And then we have one more speaker before we get to a period of question and answer, and that's Damon Tim. And Damon and his partner are leaders of Deaf Granny's Kitchen, and they're reimagining what radical inclusion can mean for deaf and hearing people. And I'd like Damon to invite you to tell us a little bit about Deaf Granny's Kitchen and also your own thoughts about inclusion and how we can be more radical as we're inclusive.
Hi, everyone. My name's Damon. Pronouns are he or they. This was my first year with Deaf Granny's Kitchen. It was my second year at the Burn, or at the Big Burn at least. And in 2019, I camped with Dirty Hands, which was also a theme camp primarily of deaf burners. I think in Deaf Granny's Kitchen, there were about 40 of us, and there were perhaps only 2 or 3 of those people were such as myself, which is a hearing person, which is the word for me. It's in the deaf community. Quickly, I guess, a little bit about my positionality. I learned sign language when I was in high school and studied it in college, and I worked as a sign language interpreter for a number of years, providing access to the deaf community, and later have moved on to more of like a coordinating or organizational aspect of providing accessibility. And in my own personal life, I have a child who is deaf, and my partner, Leela, they are also deaf, and I have other deaf family members. So the deaf community is like my primary place of existence at this point in my life. And I was asked to come here and speak to all of you on, I guess, behalf of the camp and other deaf burners who were at Burning Man. What I would like to, I guess, focus on is how we can rethink or reimagine what this radical inclusion might mean for disabled people, and in the context of my experience within the deaf community. So as Birdie and Drama Queen have pointed out, this accessibility is like, I mean, it's paramount. You have to, a space has to be accessible to someone in order for them to access it and be a part of it. But what makes Burning Man, I think, so special is this idea of a shared experience. And that what really makes it special is that we're all there sharing this unique experience together in this unique place. And that's what I want to talk about. So when we think about accessibility, especially when it comes to deaf people, a lot of times we think of, well, you need a sign language interpreter, which were available at Burning Man this year, which is really wonderful. Things like captions, or text that deaf people can read. And that is a terrific first step, in the same way that to get a wheelchair user in a space, they have to be able to actually physically get in the space. But I would argue that that's really the first step. And because Burning Man has as one of its 10 principles radical inclusion, I hope to get us to think a little bit of going beyond just access and think of what it means to be radically included in a space. And I believe that in order to do that, it requires this shared experience for us all to have together. So for myself and my partner, when Leela, when we go to Burning Man, sharing the experience together is probably the most important part. And the thing that makes our experience not shared is the fact that I can hear and Leela cannot. So if we're in a space with people who are talking using English, I am experiencing that very differently than Leela is in that example. So what we have started doing in the last few years, not just at Burning Man, but in our own personal life, when we're really aiming to have a shared experience with someone, is we try to remove all the things from the interaction that we cannot all share together. So in this example, the thing that Leela and I don't share is sound. And you can even say, I don't know if you can see my shirt here. It says communicate without sound, which is something we often wear there because when we meet other burners, we offer them this new way of interacting with us, which is, can we all communicate in this space together for this brief time without sound? And it challenges everyone to try to get in the same space together, because suddenly, if we all say, well, we're not going to use sound to communicate, and if I look around, and I say, well, you don't know sign language, so I won't use sign language to communicate because that would leave you out. Suddenly we all start to think and work in ways of like, how can we communicate together without sound or without a language that we all don't understand? And we might turn to gestures, you might turn to writing, you might turn to drawing or acting things out. There's a lot of different ways you can communicate when you stop thinking about how things function in the default world. And I've just found in my own life that this is what has really led to some of the more profound personal connections and shared experiences with people that I otherwise wouldn't have. Because I think in a normal context, you think, well, Damon can hear and knows sign language and Leela doesn't hear. So if we go to Burning Man, Damon will interpret anytime we meet a hearing person. And that is a good way to provide access for Leela, but it's a bad way for us to have a shared experience at Burning Man. And it's, I would argue, a bad way for the people we're interacting with to have a shared experience with us, because all of us are having different experiences. I'm experiencing being an interpreter, and everyone else is experiencing working through an interpreter, rather than creating kind of those direct connections with one another. So the Deaf Granny's Kitchen, being a camp primarily deaf people, we had offered a performance that was very interactive, and people could come on stage and learn to kind of communicate without using their voices in that small space. And what I'd hope to take away from this brief interaction with you all is just when you're thinking about your camps and your spaces and creating something that is accessible, maybe take it a step further and think about how you can go beyond accessibility and truly make it inclusive and radically inclusive. And to me, what that means is how can we all share an experience together? If we have people coming with different disabilities or from different backgrounds, how when we all come into this space spontaneously, can we look at each other and figure out a way to do it where we're all sharing an experience equitably? And then on just the accessibility side, from the deaf person's perspective, need access to the things you cannot hear. I saw the picture of the, I think it's called the Facing the Fear Beast, that piece of artwork, which was so very powerful. But again, when I was sitting there with Leela, it had to be explained what the voices were saying, how the artwork came together. There wasn't any captioning or anything, or any kind of indication of what the auditory part of that. So when people create their artwork or create their camps or their art cards, I think we need to keep accessibility in mind for everyone, but then also, start to think about how we can go a little bit beyond access. From an organizational perspective, it's always nice to have additional funding and dollars to help those kind of artists and art cards make the accommodations or changes that they might need to bring their artwork up to the next level. So I'll keep it short and sweet, and I'll be happy to answer questions as well.
Thank you, Damon. And a couple of examples when Damon and I were talking about having this shared experience had to do with moving at the speed of the slowest member of your group. So if there's a person who has some ambulation issues, just slow everything down and be with that person. Or if a person needs to use a ramp, instead of sending that person over there to use the ramp while the rest of the group goes over here and they catch up, have the whole group go with that person. And just like think in that mindset of how can we have more of a shared experience rather than we're sort of creating some workaround so this other person can join us eventually. So thank you, Damon, for I mean, I'm going to change the way I burn and burn with my camp because of that. Now we have a few minutes for some questions, and so if you type your questions into the chat, then we can ask any of our speakers to respond. And then when we are done in 10, 15 minutes, there'll be an opportunity for breakouts. We're going to have 2 breakout rooms, one for people that want to talk about RIDE or race inclusivity, and the other for mobility or disability. And those are completely optional. Oftentimes when we're done with these talks, we find that there are some people that just want to hang out and chat a little bit more. So the talk will end, but we'll have 2 breakout rooms for anyone that wants to continue to chat. And those will be hosted by members of the Camp Network team. So are there any questions?
So Puppy, this is Leslie. I hope you can hear me. I'm
Yes.
going to pull a question that came up a little bit earlier, a moment earlier on the chat from Rambo, who suggested maybe it was more of a comment and I think also a question, but maybe it would be good to have some sort of grant program to help projects become more accessible. And the thought is that perhaps many projects may be limited, like for example, the Sphere project, and that disallows them to add those features. Things like elevators or ramps rather than stairs could be options. Recognizing that costs way more in engineering and whatnot, but perhaps the question for folks on the panel might be, or perhaps to Level or others in the org for this might be, are there any thoughts for grant programs in this regard?
Do we have
I can try
any
to take a
takers?
stab at it.
Level, what were you saying?
I can try to take a stab at answering this question.
Okay.
I mean, I think there are limited resources, grant programs that are available through Burning Man. I do want to promote one that maybe not a lot of people know about. There's an organization called the Burner Network, burnernetwork.org, that gives small grants. I think they range, in like the $1,000 to $2,000 to $3,000 amounts that are meant intentionally for theme camps. The org does provide grants to the Temple as art and for art honoraria. Over $1 million is given out to artists, but a bulk of what is funded that makes Black Rock City what it is the community rallying itself together. So obviously theme camps pooling your camp dues, artists having Kickstarter campaigns, even meeting vehicles, that type of thing. And so I think it's a great idea. I think that we all would love to see more grants out there. And I would just propose, if people feel like there's enough support for this, to rally it together yourself. I think that I will definitely bring this back to the art department to say, one of the things I didn't mention in my presentation earlier was that, we have tweaked criteria in which honoraria was looked at, and to try to be more inclusive. And I think that bringing this particular dimension around accessibility can be something that they look at as well as they dole out those funds. So I hope it doesn't feel like a dead end, but I do want to encourage folks to think about creative ways to crowdsource as well, so it doesn't just all go back on the org. We are still a nonprofit organization and have limited funds, and so as much as we can put it back into the community, we do. And I will say, that last thing is that the man was very intentionally designed to have ramps. I think it was maybe one of the most accessible man pavilions that we've had ever. And that was coming from direct feedback from people who were unable to go up those pavilions in the past. And so I think that if that's a design criteria that we want to expect out of the temple, I will pass that along as well.
Thank you, Level. Do we have another question?
Hey, Puppy, it's Leslie again. Another question we have is from Jenny, who asks, is there anything similar to the camp advisory program for R.I.D.E and diversity? I'm a woman of color and was a camp lead this year. It would be helpful to have other burners to ask questions or get some guidance.
I can probably take this one too. I hate to be the person that keeps taking the mic, but I would say, you know, when I mentioned that we were trying to build our R.I.D.E volunteer core, part of that is because there are a lot of questions that come in saying, we need help. Can we get some coaching? Can we get some support? Can we just talk to someone to help? So we are doing our best to try to find these folks who are willing to do this. I will say also that in this field, this is a professional field that many people feel like should be paid for. And so while there are really fantastic people that are happy to chat with camps and happy to chat with individuals about what you can do, I would look into like, are you willing to pay a stipend or something for these efforts? So we're doing our best to build up as much resource as we can. And I think that, you know, camps can also look into, I know Drama Queen mentioned earlier, like having a designated R.I.D.E person. There's lots of resources out there, lots of trainings. Even if as a simple internet search will pull up things that are available to people. And, you know, we are trying to build that up as well. So I would say, you know, keep reaching out to us, but also keep reaching out across, you know, other networks that exist, because just simply going to Burning Man and saying, hey, is there a camp advisor here, isn't the only way to solve this particular question. And I think that, but I hope that in a year from now, if you ask that same question, we'll have a better answer and more people to turn you to.
Okay, Leslie, one more.
One more. What can theme camp leads do to continue to promote R.I.D.E initiatives in their camps, spaces, etc.?
Yeah, I can jump in here. In terms of the work that needs to get done on the camp level, it does take like that one voice to step up and say, hey, this is an issue, this is a challenge for us that we should address. And I think a lot of it does start at that education process, that if you know you're going to have members who don't identify as white within your camp, that it is doing that that cultural sensitivity training. There are YouTube videos out there, trainings, workshops. This is the age of DEI now. So this content is available online, and it is just getting that introduction and getting that understanding, and then leaning on the resources that Level and myself have shared earlier, going into those digital spaces and building relationships and understanding that maybe your camp isn't hosting any BIPOC members or have any campmates that identify differently, but doesn't mean you can't be a resource. And there were camps within our Discord server and in the Facebook group that didn't camp with us, but were friends of the neighborhood for that reason.
Thank you, Scout. And I also want to spotlight again the work of Mobility Camp and what Drama Queen did. I mean, I'm a camp lead, and I didn't see the memo of appointing a R.I.D.E lead. They appointed one. And actually did some good work in training their camp. So that's a great model of how camps can approach this. I want to thank all of the speakers. This was great. I really appreciate the time and energy you put into the presentations. I'd like to also thank the members of our team who made this all work so well. We've got Brady, Kat, and Leslie, who were the chat moderators, and on tech we had Monday, Jamie, and Lisa. We have our next Campfire Talk already scheduled, and I want to tell you about it. It is, the title is Who's the Boss? looking at camp leadership systems, challenges, and successes. If Burning Man is supposed to be fun, why does leading a theme camp so often run us into the ground? Hear, hear. There has to be a better way. The January Campfire Talk brings you inspiration, ideas, and tactics to avoid leadership burnout from theme camp and village leaders who earned it and learned it the hard way. Come join us for an evening of learning, sharing, and creativity. That'll be Tuesday, January 17th at this same time. And there should be a link in the chat, and you'll also get an email reminding you. We will, Drama Queen, did you have something you wanted to say? I can't hear you.
I have to leave.
Okay, all right, thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and we're gonna end the formal talk now, and you'll have an option of joining one of two breakout rooms. Thank you so much.